You see my PowerPoint? Are you seeing now my PowerPoint?
Yes po.
Yes po, sir.
Okay. So the first slide talks about the definition of sample and population. So when we say sampling, it refers to the process of systematically selecting individuals, units, or groups to be analyzed in a particular study. So the process of selecting must be systematic. So you don't just select students or parents, as the case may be, as your respondents without considering the elements, no? Ilan ba yung population, ilan ang kukunin mong sample. So as you can see in the illustration that I have here, I have two ovals here. The bigger oval represents the population, and the small part of that is a sample. So for practical purposes, we cannot study the entire population. So for example, your population involves all students in region 3. So for practical purposes, we cannot study all of them, but we can generalize the behavior of that group of all students in the region by examining a group, a representative of that group, and whatever inference, whatever conclusions that we can generate out of that small group can be generalized from the larger group at certain degrees confidence. Of course, there is some amount of error for that. So if I may make the analogy, I think I have mentioned this last time. No? If you are going to take a blood sample because you are suffering from a suspected disease, like for example, the doctor suspects that you are suffering from a high blood sugar levels, or high sugar levels rather. So the doctor will ask you to get a sample or to take a sample out of you and then analyze that sample. So kung diabetic, no, yung sample na nakuha, then it means that the entire blood system is diabetic. So hindi kailangang i-drain, ano? Hindi kailangang aralin yung buong blood system. Hindi kailangan i-drain out, no, yung liters of blood running through your veins just to show that you are a diabetic person. But instead, we only systematically get a blood sample from your arm, no, through your major vein, and then analyze that. Ang tawag dun sample blood. So, sa statistics o sa research, sample din ang tawag natin doon, whether that is individual, unit, or groups of people. So ulitin natin, the idea is that you cannot study the entire population, but you believe that the sample represents the behavior of that population. So since the sample mimics the behavior of the population, you make conclusions out of the population by the conclusions that you make out of the sample. Of course, ulitin ko, with some amount of error or with degrees of error. Kasi all measurements, but I have but errors. So hindi exemptions yan. Kahit na ito ay highly quantitative, kahit na ito ay highly experimental, we still acknowledge some room for measurement errors. But of course, we have to reduce the errors so that the greater confidence we have is the better findings, or the better replicability of the research findings will be obtained. Okay? So the question now is, how do we know the sampling technique? No? Ano ang gagamitin kong sampling technique? That's one question. And the second question in this topic is, how small is small size and how large is a large sample size? So what are the things to consider, or what are the rules or suggestions that are to be considered in selecting the sampling technique and the sample size for your study? Okay, so let's begin with types of sampling. So there are two broad types of sampling. We have the non-probability sampling and the probability sampling. So the first one is the type of sampling that we commonly use in qualitative research designs. So it is non-probability. By definition, the elements of the population is taken depending to a large extent on the personal feelings of the researcher without regard for some mechanism for choosing an element. So for example, you are talking about lived experiences of abused gay men in the region. So the criteria is based upon some characteristics, therefore, that is non-probability sampling because there is some regard to personal feelings, subjectivity in terms of taking the samples instead of doing some mechanism for choosing a participant. Hindi mo pwedeng i-random yun, di ba? Out of the population, you cannot randomly select people and then magiging sample mo siya. Hindi naman niya pinopossess yung characteristics na kailangan mo sa iyong target population. So for qualitative research, for example, ethnography, so hindi ka pwedeng mag-probability doon dahil these are special groups of people. So for non-probability sampling, because the characteristics of the groups or individuals are more or less defined by some elements, therefore, you use of the non-probability sampling. Halimbawa, priests o kaya ay mga prostitutes, for example, ang iyong mga subjects of interest. Therefore, you resort to non-probability. So by the opposite, when you say probability sampling, every element, in other words, every member belonging to the population has a known non-zero probability of being included in the sample. And these are the commonly used probability sampling technique for quantitative research design. So as long as you are a member of the population, a member or any member of that population has a chance of being selected as a sample, and there is a known, so alam natin yung non-zero probability that respondent 1 can be selected to represent the population. So probability, because we base it on some chance, measures of chance. So what is the probability that Pedro will be selected as a sample for the study is known or can be computed. Okay, so ulitin natin. If you have the population, for non-probability, you have the factor of personal feelings for the researcher to choose kung ano yung kanya maging sample. While in fact, sa probability sampling naman, every member of the population has equal chance. And not only equal chance, but is non-zero probability that he can be included as a sample. So we'll talk about the details of the probability sampling, because that's what we use in quantitative research design. So there are 5 common specific techniques or sampling techniques under the probability sampling techniques. And these are simple random, systematic sampling, stratified random, and there are 2 kinds, the equal allocation and the proportional allocation. We also have the cluster sampling and the multi-stage sampling. So we'll talk about each of these types of probability sampling and provide examples. Okay. So let's talk about the first one. It's called the simple random sampling. So in this method, we select a sample n, small letter n, from a population n, capital letter N, such that each member of the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample, and that all possible combinations of size n has an equal chance of being selected as the sample. So to understand that better is an illustration. Suppose out of the population N, we will select 300 respondents, whether they are students or parents or teachers. Basta na-define mo na 300 ang iyong kunin respondents. So to make it random or simple random, all the names of the participants, the population N, so if there are 2,000, if there are 5,000 of them, all of the names of these 5,000 participants or respondents will be listed on a piece of paper. Then perhaps it will be rolled softly and then placed on a box. And then the researcher will choose 300 pieces of paper, incomplete, random. So ito yung draw lots na tinatawag natin. Diba? Parang yung lotto. Lotto is an example of simple random. Unless otherwise you believe na dinadaya, like the ones that was won or drawn the other week yata yun yung there were 400 plus winners of the same combination. So the odds of getting it is very small. That's why it was clouded with doubts. The result was clouded with doubt, pero still people, I myself, still patronize the lottery at that. So the lottery is an example of a simple random sampling. So if it is 655, if you are playing such, lahat yung 55 na yon ay wini-weigh nila equally, and then 6 numbers is selected in complete random. So all numbers from 1 to 65 has an equal chance of being included in the 6 combination of numbers in complete random. So this is medyo madiwara doon sa sampling technique kung marami ang iyong N. Kasi talagang kailangan mong gawin ito in complete random. So if you have 10,000 members of the population, you do that in 10,000 pieces of paper, and then you select the desired number of samples. So mamaya natin pag-uusapan ilan ba yung N o maliit na N kung ang malaking N ay ito naman. So hypothetically ito, if there are 300 samples to be selected, all names of the participants, whether that's 2,000 or 5,000, will be listed on a piece of paper, and then completely in random, you pick 300. Okay? Nakikita ba yun? Simple random sampling. Do I hear a yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes
Yes
po.
po, sir.
Next. Kung hindi naman random, then we have systematic. Okay. So under this, sample units are obtained by drawing every 4th or 5th or every nth item on the list. So mayroong system of drawing in. So N are numbered 1 to N in some order, taking a sample size of N such that N, or the population divided by N, is equal to K. So yun yung ating magiging consideration. The position of the number na pwede natin pang-umpisahanan is determined by population divided by sample size. And you use that to randomly select from the first K elements and every K subsequent element. Example daw. We will choose 300 pa din from the population of 1,200. Okay? Doon sa nauna, simple random, ililista mo yung pangalan ng 1,200 isa-isa sa isang papel, and then pipili ka ng 300 in complete random. Dito naman, you don't need to do that. You have the list of the names from 1 to 1,200. Then you simply divide 1,200 by 300 as the sample size is equal to 4. So from the list of the participants numbered 1 to 1,200, you will pick every 4th name on the list hanggang makumpleto mo yung 300. So you start with 4th, then 8th, 12, 16, 20th, etc. etc. So, mas madali ng konti kasi you don't need to write the names individually on a piece of paper. Instead, you simply pick my system, kaya systematic sampling. Yung ibang ginagawa, instead na nag-uumpisa agad sa 4th, okay, ulitin ko, na-determine na niya na ang K niya ay 4. So, every 4. Pero, not necessarily mag-uumpisa sa 4. Pwedeng i-random din niya kung from 1 to 4 siya or 1 to 5, magbibilang siya o mayroon siyang numbers na 1 to 4. Then, i-randomly choose niya kung anong number yung mabunod niya. Halimbawa, number 3. So, sa 3 siya mag-uumpisa, pero every 4th pa din. So, for convenience sake, para hindi ka na malito, dahil 4 naman ito, di sa multiples of 4 ka na, huwag nang pahirapan yung sarili mo. Baka mamaya, mamali ka pa ng skip. So, skip counting na lang ng 4, so mag-umpisa ka sa 4. Para lahat ng numbers na bibilugan mo ay multiples of 4. Okay? Do I hear a yes if this is clear? Systematic sampling?
Yes, sir.
Yes po.
Dali lang maintindihan, di ba? But just divide it and then yun yung position ng yung first element and then skip count ka na lang. The next one is stratified. You do a sampling technique, but you divide it into non-overlapping subpopulations called strata or stratum pag singular. So mayroong subpopulations. So we do stratification or simply the procedure of grouping depends on the size of the sample to be taken from the strata. And it could be equal allocation or it could be proportional allocation. Pag sinabing equal size samples are drawn from each stratum regardless of the frequency distribution of the subgroups. Later, let's give an example. Proportional allocation, on the other hand, is that we consider the stratum size based on the proportion of that stratum on the subpopulation. Okay, let's have some illustration. Suppose I have 1,000 students as the population, and using some formula, the sample size is 286. So, how are you going to choose 286? Balikan natin yung una. Ma'am Neris, if you are going to use the simple random sampling, paano mo gagawin yung pagpili ng 286? Ma'am Neris? Yes, Ma'am Neris. Sir Jose Leonardo, balikan nga natin yung una. Kung simple random ang gagamitin, how do you select the 286?
Ang ano po, yung 1,000 po, i-divide sa 286.
No, the simple random.
Simple random.
The first style that we have discussed.
Wait na po. Di-divide po, hindi po ba yun?
So you are talking about systematic sampling.
Ay,
The first one, the simple random sampling. Okay, balik ko yung slide ko. Okay. Okay, sir. Nabasa mo ulit?
Wait lang po. Is the method of selecting
Okay. So let's have this one. Suppose you have 1,000 N and 286 ang N mo. How do you do that? Using simple random.
Yung N po ay ano,
Population is 1,000. Sample size is 286. How you do the sampling if no the method is simple random.
simple random.
Balikan natin si Sir Jose. Ma'am Clairmaine.
Hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Sa simple random po, pwede po gumamit, sir, ng fishbowl for 1,000
Okay.
students. Tapos, bubunot-bunot na lang po randomly.
So you are going to list the names, no, of the 1,000 students.
Yes, sir.
Paano naman kung systematic sampling? How do you do that?
For systematic, sir, i-divide po yung 1,000 to 210 po ba yun, sir? 286. 286. Tapos yung result po, dun po magsa-start mag-skip count. Yun po
So
yung
what is
magiging
1,000? What is 1,000 divided by 286?
Sir, 286 po ba?
Yes, ma'am.
That's 3 po, 3.49. So pwede pong mag-start ng 3, 3, 6, 9. Tapos yun po yung magiging chosen respondents po sa sample.
Hanggang makakuha ka ng...
Ng 286 po.
Okay, so nilinaw lang natin na binalikan lang natin yung unang dalawa na simple random at saka systematic. Ngayon, kung ito naman daw ay stratified, meron ng groupings. Halimbawa, 1,000 pero meron kang freshman, meron kang second year, third year, at gusto mo na ma-represent ang mga ito sa population, ang una mo daw gagawin ay, una, kung equal allocation at merong 4 na year levels, ano ba, college students to, first year, second year, third year, fourth year, kung meron kang 4 na groups or strata na tinatawag, so 286 equally divided by 4. So 286 divided by 4 groups, 71.5 or approximately 72. So, hindi naman sabihin ng eksakto kasi kung 0.5, wala namang 0.5 na tao. But the idea of equal allocation is that regardless kung gaano kadami ang first year, second year, third year, or fourth year sa population, hindi mo yung titignan kasi equal allocation nga. So you simply divide 286 by the number of groups na gusto mo. Kung male-female at gusto mo ng stratified, o divided by 2, yung 286. Okay, naintindihan ba yun? Pag equal allocation, you simply divide sample size by the desired number of subgroups, which are your consideration. Ngayon, pagka naman ito ay hindi equal, kundi proportional allocation, i-consider mo yung dami ng subgroups. Because you want that kung mas marami ka sa population, dapat mas marami ka rin sa sample. Proportion ang tawag doon. So for example, ilang freshmen ang kukunin sa 286 na sample size kung sa population ay 119 sila. So the situation is there are 1,000 students, 119 of these 1,000 ay freshmen at ang kukunin natin ay 286. So ilang freshmen ang kukunin natin para masama sa 286? So you simply divide the number of freshmen overall, 119, divided by 1,000. That's the number of students. And you multiply that by the sample size. So 119 divided by 1,000 times 286 is 34. So in other words, out of the 286, hindi hindi 75 o hindi 72 ang first year, kundi 34 lang. Kasi konti lang naman sila sa population. 119 lang daw ang freshmen, so 286 ang kukunin mo, you only need 34 of these freshmen. Pero kung ito ay equal allocation, 71.5. So similarly, if there are 210 sophomore students in the population, then ilang sophomore ang kukunin mo? 210 divided by 1,000 times 286 will give us 60. So kung ito ay equal allocation, 71.5. Kung ito ay proportional, 60 lang ang kukunin mo. So in other words, there are more samples to be drawn from a stratum with more numbers or members in that population. Naintindihan ba yung unang paragraph natin? You take a proportion of the sample by considering the proportion of that subgroups in the entire population. So kung mas marami ang lalaki sa babae at gusto mo ng stratified na proportional, i-proportion mo din doon sa sample size na yun. Hindi pwedeng equal. Halimbawa, 90% lalaki, 10% babae. Dapat sa sample mo, ganun pa rin siya. Kasi kung mag-random ka, baka puro babae o puro lalaki ang makuha mo. Eh, variable mo yung gender. Ganun din dito. Halimbawa, factor mo ay year level. Eh, hindi ka nag-stratified. Nag-random ka lang. Wala ka palang nabunot na 4th year. That could happen. No? Incomplete random, pwedeng wala kang masaling respondent na 4th year. So para makasigurado ka na 1st year to 4th year ay meron kang sample, either you do equal allocation, stratified random, or you do proportional allocation. Okay? So 34 daw ang kukunin ko na 1st year. Ang tanong, paano ko yun pipiliin? May dalawa ka pa ring choice. Pwede ka pa rin mag-random. So, ibig sabihin, meron kang pangalan ng mga first year, 119. So, nakahiwalay itong 119 na first year na pangalan na nasa fishbowl. And then, pipili ako ng 34. Kung yung pagpili ko ng 34 ay random selection, dahil fishbowl, ang tawag na natin sa kanya ay stratified random sampling. Ini-stratify ko muna, tapos pumili ako in random. Okay? Pinag-combine ko yung elements ng stratification at saka ng random. Ang tawag doon ay stratified random sampling. Kung gusto ko naman gawing systematic, for example, mayroon akong listahan ng 119 students. Okay? Ang first year. At ang kukunin ko ay 34. So ano ang aking K? 119 divided by 34 is 3.5. So every third element. So meron akong listahan ng 1 to 119 na first year. Then pipiliin ko si third, 6, 9, 12. So nagsisystematic sampling ako, pero nag-stratify muna ako. Ang tawag doon na stratified systematic sampling. So I'll do that also for sophomore, for the junior, and for the senior students. So the first step is I stratified it using either equal allocation or proportional. And then, paano ko pipiliin yung proportion na yon? Either stratified random or stratified systematic sampling. Okay, do you have any question for that third type of sampling technique? Just say your piece kung mayroong tanong para kasi pwedeng magkaroon tayo ng sub-layer pa ng groups. Halimbawa, ang first year natin ay 34. Tapos another factor mo ay gender. Yung 34 hahatiin mo pa sa dalawa, male and female. O ilang male, ilang female. Pag equal allocation, tagsi 17. 17 na lalaki, 17 na babae. Pero parehong first year. Ngayon, kung gagawin mo na namang proportional ito, so 34 ang magiging population mo. Tapos, ilang percent ito sa iyong kukunin. So, naka-sub layer na naman. So, ito ang ginamit natin, isang grouping lang, isang strata lang, year level. But you can do multiple levels of stratification depending kung how crucial the variable or the grouping of the variable is. Pero kung hindi naman, at ang gusto mo lang may represent ng mabuti, yung mga year levels, so kahit na one level stratification lang. But if you have other subgroups which are crucial, like sabi ko nga, gender, so you don't just randomly select 34 freshman students because you might choose 34 males only. Baka wala kang makuhang females. So to make sure that the freshmen are well represented and males and females are also well represented, magsi-second layer stratification ka. Either equal or proportional. Okay? Do I hear a yes if it is clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next is cluster sampling. This is just a variation of the stratified sampling where the strata correspond to clusters. Information is obtained from individual units called clusters that may have heterogeneous characteristics. So for example, instead of students, a college unit may be considered as one cluster. So alam natin, sa cluster na to, iba-iba daw yung characteristics. Heterogeneous daw yung characteristics ng mga members na ito. But since you take them as a cluster, you will treat them as one group. Yun is binang cluster sampling. But it's just a very ito yung ginagamit pagka meron kang mga stages or may mga levels ka ng hierarchy of offices or of the bureaucracy where samples can be drawn. So, multi-stage sampling, wherein the population is divided into sequence of sampling units that correspond to different sampling stages. So, for example, is we would like to get a sample of teacher respondents to evaluate a particular effectiveness of an intervention program developed by the national office, for example, of DepEd. And we want to have teachers as our evaluators. We cannot ask all teachers in the entire archipelago to do it, so we do sampling. So how do we do that? We do it at different stages. Regional. So, ang gagawin ko, maaaring magra-random ako sa regional level. Pero pwede ako mag-set ng criteria like NCR is a must. And 6 other regions will be randomly selected. Meron akong regions 1 to kung ilan tayong region. Ilang region na ba tayo, Sir Janry? Do you know? Except NCR, how many regions are there? Manghe kasi natin, no? Ilan ba ang regions natin, Sir Ivan?
Hindi ko po sure kung 17 po yan.
Pero hindi pa naman about than 20. With the inclusion of NCR, the CAR, and the ARRM, I think it's 19. O halimbawa ay
Yes, sir. May 4A and 4B pa po pala.
4A, 4B, gano'n. Halimbawa ay kailangan ko lang 10 na regions. 1 is NCR, automatic. So ang gagawin ko, I'll use random sampling or simple random to select the other 9 regions. So I'll write on a piece of paper regions 1 to 19. including, of course, the other special administrative regions. Then in random, I'll choose regions na siyam. O, halimbawa, nabunot doon region 3. So, kasama na si region 3, di ba? So, sa bawat region na napili, ipoprovincial ko naman. So, region 3 nakalagay, napili si region 3. So, ang gagawin ko, lahat ng provinces sa region 3, lilista ko ulit sa papel. Okay? And then pipili ako halimbawa ng 5. Then, pag napili ang Nueva Ecija, lahat ng congressional districts naman sa Nueva Ecija. Napili ko naman ay Science City of Muñoz. Ay, ano ba doon? District, ano ba tayo? Sa Muñoz. District 2, District 1, 3rd District. 3rd yata. And then, lahat ng nasa district, divisions naman. And then, pag nakuha ko yung division at doon na nag-end, o di division, lahat ng nandun sa division na yun. Ngayon, kung gusto mo pa ng school level, huling level yon. So, ibig sabihin, kung sa umpisa pa lang sa regional level ay hindi napili ang Region 3, hindi makakasama ang Muñoz. Dahil hindi makakasama ang Nueva Ecija. Kasi nga, natanggal na siya, hindi na siya napili doon pa lang sa regional level. Because sa first stage pa lang, ay hindi na siya nasama. Okay, naintindihan ba yun? Multi-stage sampling. Ngayon, hindi lang naman pwedeng simple random. No? Pwedeng ang gagamitin mo ay systematic. Sa umpisa pa lang, regional level pa lang, systematic ka na. Okay? Or, sa first stage pa lang, stratified ka na kaagad. O, equal allocation na lang muna tayo sa lahat ng region. Para lahat ng region, meron. O, stratified yon. Equal allocation, pantay-pantay. Ay, hindi po pwedeng pantay-pantay. Mas marami pong schools ang region Calabarzon. O di, i-proportion mo siya para malaman mo kung ilang schools, ilang teachers ang kukunin mo sa bawat region, bawat province, bawat district, at bawat division level. Kasi ano to di ba? National survey, for example, or national evaluation. So, kung sa NCR lang ako mag-i-evaluate, o di hypothetical masyado yun, di ba? Dahil NCR is not the archipelago. Hindi pwedeng Muñoz lang din. Muñoz does not represent the entire district. So that's how crucial sampling is. Okay? So whatever your sampling technique, whether ito ay sample na rin, simple random, ito ay systematic, stratified, cluster, or multi-stage, ang susunod na issue ngayon is, so ilan ba talaga ang kailangan namin? For practicality, sabi natin, mas kukonti, okay lang. Pero baka naman sa sobrang konti niya is hindi na siya enough para ma-represent niya yung population. Halimbawa sa blood test, pwede bang isang patak lang para sa cholesterol level? O, konting masyado. Kung isang patak, pwede siguro blood typing lang yon. But if you do further analysis like blood counts, blood chemistry, complete blood profile, I think there is certain amount that will satisfy the required tests. So hindi pwedeng ganun ka-konti. Pero hindi naman isang galon, di ba? Kasi nga for practical purposes and at the same time, practicality that will ensure validity and reliability of findings. Kahit na konti lang. Okay? So how do we determine sample size? There are 4 different methods of determining sample size. The first one are the rule of thumb or yung tatawaging heuristics, like depende sa analysis. May mga general rules na ginagamit. Pwedeng formula, the most famous of which at ginagamit pa rin ngayon, if you heard of it, is the Slovene formula. Narinig niyo ba yan? Slovene formula or Slovene formula in determining sample size? The third one is literature review. Ano na yung ginamit na na-published? Ginamit ni so and so noong 2010. So pwede daw kung gamitin din yun as reference. But the most precise is power analysis. So ito ay meron tayo sa internet. Depende kung ano yung statistics, ano yung population size, i-compute niya kung ilan yung minimum mong sample size. So it's called power analysis. After our class, no, i-search nyo yun. And then you do some navigations of the program by inputting the required information. So the heuristics as proposed by Lonenberg and Irby in 2008 says the following. If you're doing a survey, it's a descriptive survey, regardless of the population, it should be 800 at least participants. So hindi naka-consider dito kung ano yung capital N. Walang population dito. Okay? As long as you have 800 at least of the participants, then survey methods, because di ba survey methods measures description of people's feelings, attitudes on certain issues and topic as it exists on a wider scale. So it's called a survey. Kaya yung Family Feud kulang. No? Nanonood ba kayo ng Family Feud? Anybody who watch Family Feud? Meron ba? Anybody from the group who is watching or have watched Family Feud?
Yes, sir.
Oh, ilan daw yung sino-survey nila? Sabi nung host. Di ba may tanong? Tapos huhulaan ng mga contestant ko ano yung mga naging sagot ng mga sinorvey kung nandun, di ba? Sabi ng host,
100 daw po.
nag-survey ng 100 na mga tao, di ba? So kulang. O, kasi masyado namang maraming 800. Kasi baka kunwari lang yun eh. Baka sila lang din na kunwari lang. Baka yung content writer na lang o yung writer, creative writer ng show ang nagsabi ng mga sagot na yun at yung mga numbers na hypothetical. Kasi minsan kung ano yung mga tanong eh. I think kunwari na lang yun na nag-survey ng 100 na tao at tinanong ano ang madalas na naiiwan ng babae pag aalis na sila ng bahay at may lakad. Mag-survey nga tayo, Family Feud. Teresa, magbigay ng unang bagay na naiiwan ng babae o ng wife pag sila ay lalabas o kung sila ay may lakad. Teresa, sagot? Bigla yata si Ma'am Teresa sa tanong ko ano. O si ano na lang, si Gian. Gian, nag-survey ng 100 na mga tao. Iwan babae o asawang babae pag sila ilalabas ng bahay, pag may lakad.
Sukulay po.
Tama ba ang suklay ng dad? Diba? Nasa board ba yon? Ping! Kapag meron, di ba? And the top answer is lipstick. Yung kikay bag. Yan. Ay, hindi siguro pala. Hindi yun nakakalimutan eh. Ano yung nakakalimutan? O, kunwaring survey. So, sa research, if you're doing a survey, you have to have at least 800 participants. That's a lot. Kasi, survey eh. Okay? Pag correlational lang analysis, simple correlation, o kaya regression analysis, then you do the study of involving at least 100 to 200 participants. If you are doing ex post facto, ito yung causal comparative, the effect existed already, then 30 plus. Pwede na mo nang gamitin to compare. Pag ito na may experimental, dahil maraming i-control na variable, so at least 30. So these are the rules of thumb, no? And as far as doing sampling is concerned. Now, if you are not comfortable with this kasi nalilitan ka sa experimental na 30 or nalalakihan ka sa 800 na participants, hindi naman tayo pwedeng mag-stick dyan. Ano? There are other consideration. So, gumamit ka ng formula. Since the formula or this Levin's formula, which is still used today, is used when you ignore completely the behavior of the population. So whether the population is normally distributed or not, then you use the sample size formula. N is equal to N, which is the population size, all over 1 as the constant, plus the quantity N E squared. So the N, capital N, is the population size. So alam na natin yon. Ipa-plug mo lang dyan sa formula yung capital N. Constant yung 1. Yung error ay mamimili ka lang kung 0.05, 0.01, or 0.001. So ano ibig sabihin ng error tolerance na yon? Pag sinabi mong 0.05, and that is 5%, you allow 5% error. Okay? Yun ang measurement error mo. 5%. Pinakamababa yun, 5%. Now, if you want to be more confident that your sample is a true representative of your population, then you make it 0.01. In other words, you are 99% confident. Kasi 1% lang yung inallow mo for error. If it is experimental and you want it to be highly, napakaliit na ng error, then ang E mo ay 0.001. So you are 99.99 confident. Sir, pwede ba gawin nating 100 na lang? Gawin nating 0.000. O edi, what becomes of N? Teresa, pag siniro na natin yung error, ano ang population, anong sample size natin? Nagsasalita ka ba, Ma'am Teresa? Hindi ko naririnig.
Sir, sirado po ata yung mic niya. Nag-chat po siya sa chat box.
Okay, basahin natin ang chat niya. Sira po mic ko. Okay. So, ang sabi niya N. So, ang N mo ay N na din. So, nakita niyo to, gumagalaw yung aking cursor. Pag itong error ay sinabi ko, pwede bang 100% confident ako na walang error? O if this is 0, this whole quantity becomes 0. So, it's N over 1. So, N pa din siya. O di, pag gusto mo daw ng 100% sure ka, huwag kang mag-sampling. Di ba? Aralin mo lahat. Isama mo silang lahat para wala kang error. Kasi, sinama mo na eh. Eh di ba kaya tayo nagpo-percent because we want to set a parameter in which we are confident that the sample that we obtain is a representative of the population that we are investigating. So we set 5%, 1%, 0.01%, but we can never set it at 0%. Otherwise, you are not doing sampling at all. Okay? So ang constant dyan yung 1, yung error pwedeng 0.05, 0.01, or 0.001. Habang lumiliit yung error tolerance, dumadami yung required sample size. So for example, Find the sample size required for a population of size n if the error of tolerance is 0.05. Okay. So this must be F. So 1,000 all over 1 plus 1,000 multiplied by the quantity 0.05 squared. So by rules of mathematics, the PERMDAS. So 0.05 square muna. 0.05 times 0.05. Then multiply that by 1,000. Add that with 1. And then whatever that quantity is, divide 100 with that quantity. So that's the mathematical representation of Slovene formula. So paano yun? Line natin yung 0.05. 0.05 square is 0.0025 times 1,000 as the population is 2.5 plus 1 as the constant is 3.5. So ang divisor natin, yung nasa ilalim is 3.5. So 1,000 divided by 3.5 is 285.7. So round that off to a whole number, it gives us 286. So ito kanina yung basis ko dito, no? If you remember the example, eto. Suppose n is 1,000 and sample size is 286. So dyan ang galing kanina yung ating example na 286. So using 5% error tolerated will give us 286. Eh kung 1%, Sir Bon, ang gagamitin nating error, ano ang ating sample size? Paki-compute mo nga. Sir Bon? What if the error is 1% or 0.01?
909.09 or
900,
909.
ilan?
909 po.
909. Ang dami na, di ba? From 286, naging 900. Konti na lang ang hindi kasali. Okay? So the minimum is 286. Hindi ibig sabihin na 286 lang, ha? Ang ibig sabihin nitong sample size na 286 is the least number, ang pinakamababa to the minimum is 286. You could have 100, you could have 600, depende kung ilan yung gusto mo. Basta huwag bababa ng 286. Okay? So at 5% error tolerance, you need to have at least 286 sample size. Okay? So suppose that our population is categorized into sexes like male and female. At gagamit ka ng stratified sampling na proportional. Ito ang magiging sampling table natin. So 1,000 ang ating population, 350 ang male, 650 ang female. So 35% ay male, 65% ay female. So na-compute mo 286 ang sample size. So ilan sa 350 na lalaki ang kunin mo? 35%. So 350 all over 1,000 times 286 will give you 100. Similarly, 650 females divided by 1,000 times 286 will give us 186 female. So hindi equal na divided by 2 yung 286. Kasi masyadong marami ang babae sa population, therefore dapat mas marami rin sila sa sampling table natin. So instead na 286 divided by 2, taga 143, equal na sana, hindi equal ang ginawa dito, kundi ginawang proportional. So it's 350 divided by 1,000, that's 35% of the 286 will give you 100 students that are male. Now, suppose that your cluster is level of education, high school and college, tapos meron pang gender. Okay? O, basahin lang muna natin itong unang table. Ang unang table ay population. 1,000 ang population divided into 350 male and 650 female. Sa 350 na male, 200 ang high school dito, 150 ang college, 350 dito sa 650 females ay high school, at yung natitirang 300 ay college. So ilan lahat ang high school? Pag pinagsama mo yung babae at lalaki, 550. Ilan lahat ang college? Pag pinagsama mo yung babae at lalaki, it's 450. So, pag binasa ko yan, mayroong 300 college students na babae. May 200 high school students na lalaki. May 350 high school students na babae. Mayroong 150 college students na lalaki. So, yan yung distribution nila sa population. So, kung gagamitin ko yung dalawa na yan, level at saka sex, at 286 ang aking sample size, malalaman ko yung specific na number nila sa bawat cells. Okay? So, ilan daw ang lalaki na high school student? 200 ang lalaki na high school divided by 1,000 silang lahat. That's 20%. Times 286 yung aking sample size. So, 57. So, I will ask 57 male students na high school graduate to participate in my study. And shall I do it in random? Shall I do it in systematic way? Or shall I do another level of technique? So, dalawang beses akong nag-stratify dito. Pero pinagsabay ko siya using the frequency distribution above. Then ginamit ko yung information na yon to complete my sampling plan. So, malinaw na kaagad na I only need 43 college graduate students na male. So, doon sa 150 na original na list, pipili ako doon ng 43. Doon sa 200 na male high school, pipili lang ako ng 57. Sa 350 na female high school, I only choose 100. And lastly, for the 300 female who are college graduate, I'll only need 86. So, yun pa rin kanina, 86 plus 100 is 186 ang female, then 100 ang male. So, ang high school, 157, at ang college ay 129. So, kahit saan mo i-total yan, it should be equal to 286. Ganun din yung population kanina. Horizontal or vertical subtotal will give you 8,000. So, ganun din sa sample size. Okay? So, please ask specific questions kung meron kayong tanong dito sa sampling plan na ito. How is it completed? Saan galing yung mga numbers na yan? Although in-explain naman natin. If you still want to clarify that, feel free to ask question. Okay, anybody? May tanong ba? Ma'am Maylene, do you have any questions? Sir Ivan, do you have any question in mind?
Ano naman po, sir?
Malinaw naman, ano? Klaro?
Yes.
Gian,
Okay na po.
si Sir Adrian. Adrian,
Ayos naman po, sir.
okay. Nothing mathematical pa naman, di ba? Ano lang to? Divide lang, multiply lang naman tayo, di ba? Okay, so nag-umpisa siya sa 286, then ni-split lang natin into several subgroupings. Pero kung itong 286 na to ay wala ka ng clustering or grouping, o di basta 286 na lang out of 1,000. Kaya lang nga, kung factor mo yung dalawang variables na to, level of education, at pwede pa itong maging tatlo, ano? For example, pwede ko pang gawing yung high school na to at college ay split ko pa into public and private. So yung 57 na male, mahahati pa yun into another group of cluster or stratum, which is type of school. So ganoon din sa population, naalamin mo. Ilan ba sa population kasi ang public and private? At yun ang basis natin. Okay, so later yun ang assignment ninyo. Gagawa tayo ng extended sampling plan out of this. Okay? Yung isa naman, literature review. Una, heuristics or rule of thumb. Pangalawa ay formula, and the most common of which is the Slubin. Ito naman ay yung literature review. Sample size, according to Green, is determined using these two formula. N should be at least. Diba? Pag greater than or equal to, ay at least 50 plus 8m. So 850 is a constant plus 8 multiplied by m, where m is the number of IB, testing for multiple correlations. So if you have 10 variables and you are testing for their multiple correlations, so that's 50 plus 8 times 10. So you need 90. At least 90. Masyadong mababa, sabi naman ni rules of thumb. So, depende nga kung ano yung mas komportable kang gamitin. Depende rin yun sa publication material at journal. No? May mga journal na stricto sa sample size. Ayaw nilang tanggapin kung masyadong konti. Or if you are testing for individual predictors, sabi ni Green, it should be at least 104 plus m. 104 plus m. So if you have 10 predictors and you are testing for individual predictors, you have to have at least 114 sample size. Again, medyo maliit ito sa mga standard na publication ngayon sa mga quantitative analysis, lalo na kung structural equation modeling, ang nire-require doon mga libo, no? Thousands of sample size. But for sabi nga natin is acceptable. Though acceptable does not necessarily mean it's publishable automatically to the desired journal, is that you can use either the formula, the rules of thumb, or this literature review. Pagdating sa power analysis, then the software automatically computes that. Depende kung ano yung statistical analysis na gagamitin mo, ano yung degrees of freedom, ano yung confidence level, at ano yung population size. If a factor niya yon, kasama yon, then determining the sample size. Okay? So far, meron kayong tanong? Malinaw ba tayo mula sa umpisa? So, generalize lang natin. We take a sample out of the population and we base the conclusions of the population based on the results that we get out of the sample. Ang ibig sabihin nito, kahit kumuha ulit ako ng panibago dito, for example, I'll take another, pag kumuha ulit ako ng sample dito, ito ulit yung sample ko, my assumption is, kung ano yung nakuha ko ditong result sa sample A, dapat pag inulit ko yung study at kumuha ulit ako ng panibagong sample B, the assumption is 5% confident ako na parehas ang resulta. Yun ang sabihin ng testing the hypothesis using samples from population. Ganon din sa blood screen, di ba? So pag kumuha ko ng sample ng dugo ko ngayon sa left arm at diabetic, kahit na kumuha ko sa right arm, I have the full assumption or strong assumption that's still diabetic because it's the same population. Another example pa natin, yung palay, di ba? Yung nagbuburiki ng palay, yung nagtitin o nagbibenta, bumibili ng palay. Hindi naman niya kayang ibuhos lahat yung 100 na sako ng palay mula sa truck para i-judge niya kung ito ba ay pang 16 pesos per kilo or pang 18 pesos or pang 20 pesos per kilo. So ang gagawin niya, magra-random lang siya. Unang sako, kung ano yung nakita niya, malamang yun ang laman ng buong truck. Pero siyempre, unfair naman kung isa lang, di ba? Isa pa nga. O isa pa. O hanggang sa matusok na niya, pati yung kargador, di ba? Sabi ko yung example natin mo karaan. Bakit nagkulay-pula naman na yung palay? Yung pala, natusok yung natutulog na pahinante doon. Ganon din sa sibuyas, di ba? Magra-random lang yung buyer, 2 o 3 sako, ibubuhos niya doon sa kalsada. O pagka-reject yung sample, reject din. And that holds true for almost everything that we have. Kasi nga, perception is the rule of the game. Kaya pag sinabing, taga sa LSU yan, magaling yan. O, kasi nga, sample ka. Dahil may sample na magaling, o lahat na ng members ng population is assumed to have that characteristic. Kaya pagbutihin ninyo, di ba? Dahil it's either you represent the population negatively or positively. So doon tayo sa positive, no? Ang pangit naman nung ang sampling mo ay si LSU ano yan? Kaya pala ganyan kasi si LSU yan. Kaya pala ganun kasi si LSU yan. So hindi ka man kasali doon sa inaral dahil gini-generalize yung findings sa buong population, o di ba madalas na rin narinig yung ganyan sa public, di ba? Meron tayong mga ganung mga connotations na narinig, di ba? O ganoon talaga pag nasa public. O ganoon talaga pagka matandang dalaga na. O ganoon talaga pagka iglesia. Ganoon talaga pag Katoliko. So they generalize findings based on perceptions obtained from the sample group. But if this is data-based, may founding, may grounding. Pero kung ito ay marites lang, ito ay chismis lang, hindi naman pwedeng gawing general rule. Okay? Sabihin nyo, pag mayroong tanong, kung wala, then let's move to the second item of the topic, which is instrument in quantitative research. So sa non-probability at qualitative, mayroon ding iba-ibang rules na sinusunod. Like case study, ilan dapat. Pagka-focus group, ilan dapat. Pero yon hindi masyadong stricto kasi mathematically ay hindi nga siya probability sampling, di ba? Wala nga siyang, hindi known yung chance na makuha ang isang participant. It's subjective. may mga case study na 3 lang, merong mga napapublish na ilang piraso lang, single case, may mga ganun pa. So, mas lenient yung sampling issues sa qualitative research as compared to quantitative research designs, if I may. Okay. So, allow me to share the second part. Okay, do you still see my screen? Nagbago ako ng PowerPoint. Do you see that?
Sampling pa din po, sir.
Sampling pa din. So, I need to stop share siguro. Then share again. But this time, it's a different slide. And let's see if it works. So what do you see now?
Nakikita na po.
Instrument na po.
Instruments. Okay. Or measurement techniques or instrumentation. Sa mga journal, sometimes ang ginagamit na word ay measures. So, measures, instruments, parehas lang yun. So, after you were able to craft your specific research questions, alam mo na yung hypothesis, then alam mo na kung sino yung target respondents using sampling. Siyempre, yung mga local of the study, ano na yung trivial na yun, ano, kung saan yun, kailan mo gagawin. Mas importante dito kung ano yung instrument na gagamitin mo to gather data for a particular research topic or question. So there are 4 common instruments in quantitative research that include tests, questionnaires, interviews, and observations. Although yung interviews and observations are oftenly used in qualitative research, there are cases also that interviews can be used to triangulate results of tests or observations. Pwedeng i-quantify din naman yan. So tests could either be performance-based or paper and pencil tests like for an achievement test. Pag ito naman ay attitude using survey questionnaires, and then pwede rin naman. So tests are actual performances, whether it is aptitude, interest, ability, or achievement-related outcomes. Questionnaires are more commonly used as the term. Pagka nag-study, saan yung questionnaire mo? Asan na yung asan yung gagamitin mong questionnaire? Pa-check naman po ng questionnaire. So, mas madalas questionnaire yung mas ginagamit nating terms for our instrument that we use in our quantitative research, especially in the field of social education and psychological studies. Pero pagka agriculture, fisheries, or the science, hard sciences, they don't use questionnaires. Instead, they use tests. Okay? Mas gamay nila yan, or mas specific yun sa kanila. So, in the section where you are going to write about your instrument, what are things to be considered in writing it or in describing the instrument? So at least these items must be included in the write-up. 1, you have to state what the actual instrument that you use is. What is the purpose of the instrument? Who developed the instrument? If it's not, you adapted it ba? O hindi naman, ginawa mo ba on your own? How many items are there in the questionnaire? What is the response format that you use? How did you score, or how will you score the responses? And as much as possible, the psychometric properties of the instrument, such as reliability and validity measures or indices of the instrument. So I'll have an example here. This is a paper Although niretype ko lang siya. On how the measure or instrument section of the paper was written. Nakalagay. Maraming instruments ang ginamit. Marami siyang mga variables na sinukat. So, inisa-isa niya. Una, achievement goals. Then, period. So, sabi dito, the Achievement Goals Questionnaire developed by Elliott and Church, 1997. So, naka-state kaagad yung source, yung developer, o yung author. Was used to assess, parang wrong grammar. Was used to assess participants' achievement goals for the exam. So, naka-state ano yung purpose. So, yung actual instrument, yung purpose, at saka yung developer in a single sentence ay naka-describe na agad. This questionnaire is composed of 6 items for each of the 3 achievement goals. Mastery goals. The Cronbach alpha is 0.85. Sample item is, ayan, pati sample item naglagay. So in each of the scale, naglagay siya ng Cronbach alpha as a measure of reliability. By and by, we will talk about it. And then, mayroong sample item para magka-idea yung reader na, yun pala yung sabihin ng mastery goals. So, without looking at the appendix part of the paper, magkaka-idea na si reader na itong mastery goals ay mayroong 6 items at ang sample item ay ito at ang alpha coefficient niya ay mataas, 0.85. And so on and so forth. Then the last 2 sentences says, in completing the questionnaire, participants indicated the response to each item on a 1, which is not at all true of me, to 7, which is very true of me scale. So how did they answered is indicated, or in other words, the response format is described. And lastly, how was it scored? The responses were averaged to form the mastery performance approach and performance avoidance goal indices. So that's how we describe the instrument in our research proposal. And that's also how do we describe it when we have the final paper for defense and for publication. Yung iba, mas stricto, pag publication na at high-end yung journal, hinahanapan nila ng validity like confirmatory factor analysis. But for our instance, pwedeng hanggang reliability at least, no? As a psychometric property, pwede na hanggang Cronbach alpha. But for publication to other journals, they would require you to perform structural validity such as CFA, no? Kung narinig nyo na yung confirmatory factor analysis, to determine na talagang valid yung instrument mo. But if an instrument has been used in many times in different circumstances and it is found to be very valid, you don't need to establish that kasi sasabihin mo lang na this questionnaire has been validated in several studies and etc. etc. Kung sikat na yung instrument, hindi mo na kailangang i-report yung o gawa ng validity because it has been used several times in different contexts and circumstances. Okay? So that's how we write it. Now, sa qualitative research, tatlo lang naman ang pwedeng kwento niyan. Una, it's either you are adapting an instrument in which you use the instrument as is because this instrument has been used in well-known institutions or reputable studies and publications. The first example that I used is simply an adaptation as is. Ginamit na daw ito ni Elliott and Church, so yun din ang ginamit niya. Now, another way of doing it is instead of adaptation, or adaption rather, you modify an existing instrument because you believe that modifying it would best fit the conditions of your study So, pwede mong i-modify to generate the exact data that you want to obtain, such as rewording the items to satisfy the context and conditions of your study. For example, yung existing instrument ay may salitang science class, and you want to modify that to satisfy the context, which is your study naman ay mathematics class. So, imo-modify mo, papalitan mo lahat ng science class into mathematics class. Or, college students, ang instrument, sasabihin mo naman ay high school students. So, you are changing or rewording some items such that you are satisfying the context, but still the exact data is generated. Okay? Now, if there is no instrument to be adapted, therefore wala ka ring mamomodify, then you can create your own instrument. Still aligned with your research questions, you can be guided by instruments used in similar studies, but you are creating it as your own. Medyo mas challenging ito dahil wala pang instrument na katulad nito. Therefore, issues pa dito ang psychometric properties. So, mas mahigpit ang validation nito dahil ikaw lang ang gumawa. Although may basis ka, may guide ka na ibang instrument, it appears that it is your own instrument. Therefore, it has to go through rigorous stages of validation. Actually, doing research validation is a single study on its own. So, pag nakakabasa kayo, yung mga MSGC people, may nakabasa kayo mga journal na validation of a scale is already a study on its own. Publishable na yon. How much more yung doing and writing your own instrument. But in cases that there is no instrument to be used, you can be asked to create one and then do content validation by experts and then do some construct validation by pre-testing your instrument to students before you do it to your actual students. Okay, so adapt, modify, or create your own instrument, whether it is a questionnaire, whether it is a test, interview protocols, or observation checklist. Okay? Ang maganda naman ngayon dahil tayo ay marami ng online publication, authors are generous enough to share instruments that they use in their study because by sharing, so they can be cited as well. It will increase their citations. They are generous enough to share links. So maglalagay lang sila ng sample items and then they are welcoming other researchers to contact them and have their instruments used. Then isa-cite mo lang siya. So the more times that research is cited, then the better of him. Kasi dumadami ang kanyang H-index o tumataas ang kanyang citation index. Okay? Now, the next slide talks about validity. Very briefly, yung mga EDOC people, even the MSGC people knows about this already. So, re-review lang natin. So, when we say validity, this is the state where we are measuring what it is supposed to measure. So, nasukat ba ng test yung dapat niyang sukatin? That's validity. So, there are 5 types of validity in quantitative research. The first one is phase validity. So the instrument measures the facets or phases or features of the variables being measured. For example, you are measuring numerical proficiency as the variable. So yung numerical proficiency ba ay nasukat yung facets na yon? Meron bang problem solving? Meron bang etc. So pag ito ay verbal proficiency, meron bang grammar, meron bang identifying error, meron bang vocabulary. So that's face validity. And that's the first, and although it's the least reliable measure of validity, it's the first way, no, it's the shortest way of saying the instrument has face validity because the facets or the features of the variables being measured have been accounted for. Now, if you want to look at the individual items, you do content validity. So sa face validity, hindi ka pa nag-item per item. Tinitignan mo lang kumpleto ba yung components ng verbal proficiency? May part ba na rules, may part pa na vocabulary, may part pa na synonym antonym, meron bang reading comprehension? If so, then you would say right away, oh, that has face validity evidence. Now, the content validity naman is the instrument covers a representative sample of the variable being measured. Baka naman puro verbal o baka naman ang dami-daming reading comprehension items, wala nang grammar rules. So, iisa-isahin mo ngayon kung does it represent the variable. Construct, the instrument should measure the intangible or abstract variable called the construct being measured. For example, you are measuring something that you don't see, but it's perception, like intrinsic motivation. You cannot feel, touch, taste, or see someone's level of intrinsic motivation because it's a construct. It's an abstract variable. So construct validation is used when you want to test whether the items that you have written as something observable, when combined, will represent the something intangible or abstract variable. Okay? Like intrinsic motivation, since you cannot measure intrinsic motivation right away, then you write items that will measure that intangible abstract variable. For example, I will write 10 items to measure intrinsic motivation. One item could be, I like doing math problems. So one of the items is indicative of intrinsic motivation. So if a child says, I strongly disagree, then you can assume that the abstract or the intangible intrinsic motivation is low because hindi siya nag-agree doon sa sentence na I like to solve math problems. Then the other items could be, I enjoy doing math homework, I am looking forward to learning new lessons in math, I am excited to learn math, etc., etc. So if there are 10 items and lahat ng items na yon that you believe that are representation of the construct intrinsic motivation, kung lahat ng sagot niya doon ay agree siya, then you can use the answers quantitatively of the student as a reference in describing his intrinsic motivation. Just like intelligence, di ba? IQ is not an intangible, or is not a tangible rather, because it's not something physical, it's abstract. Next is the criterion validity, which is either concurrent or predictive. Criterion validity is concurrent if the instrument is related to a test similar to what is being measured and are employed simultaneously. Example, pag mataas ka sa verbal, mataas ka rin dapat sa numerical or negative ba yung correlation niya. Or kung mataas ka sa memorization, kung mataas ka doon sa essay, dapat mataas ka din sa graded recitation because they are testing similar constructs or skills. Concurrent validity ang tawag doon. Predictive naman, if we could use the instrument to predict something in the future. For example, can your test in job interview predict whether someone becomes productive 5 years after you hire them? If yes, then you can use that instrument as basis for hiring people. So ibig sabihin, hindi pa pinapakita ng tao yung kanyang ugali sa trabaho, kaya mo nang i-predict yung kanyang magiging performance if you were able to establish the criteria and validity of that instrument. So the test development, as I have said earlier, is a study by itself. Kaya medyo mabusisi no, itong criterion validity at saka construct validity na tinatawag. Okay? What about instrument reliability? So if validity measures what it is supposed to measure, reliability refers to the consistency and dependability of the measures of an instrument, even if you take or administered it several times at different circumstances. So consistent ba yung result? Yun ibig sabihin nun. Halimbawa, thermometer, feeling mo may lagnat ka, nag-test ka 39.5. Inulit mo 36.9. So, hindi mo alam kung may lagnat ka o wala because it's inconsistent. So something that is inconsistent is not dependable. Therefore, you cannot make use of something inconsistent as a basis of judging your actions. So you have to determine some level of consistency. Pero kung unang basa, 39.5, 39.6, 39.5, 39.4, 39.6, inulit-ulit mo na several times, lagi mataas, therefore there is consistency already of the instrument. Okay? So there are different ways of determining the consistency of the instrument. Yung tinatawag nating pinaka-common is the test retest. Yan lang ay charge ko lang itong. Okay, do you still see my screen? Nandiyan pa ba kayo?
Yes po, sir.
Okay, sige. Well, good. So test retest is you administer an instrument twice to the same group of respondents. So you give the test today, and then after some time, you give it again without changing anything. Then you correlate the results. If the correlation is high, therefore the test is reliable because there is consistency of responses. Kung alam mo talaga. Hindi mo alam talaga. Pag mababa ang sagot mo sa intrinsic motivation scale, kahit ulitin yon, mababa pa rin. Okay? Kung reliable yung instrument, reliable din ang sagot mo. Equivalent forms, you administer two tests that are identical in all aspects. So sa test retest, ulitin mo parehas. Sa equivalent forms, magkaiba, pero magkaparehas lang sila sa coverage, sa difficulty, sa test type and format, and then you correlate the results. Students who scored high on the first part or first type should also score high on the second type because the tests are identical in all aspects. The third one is internal consistency. How well the items in two instruments measure the same construct. Ito yung construct, sabi natin, yung ating abstract. Pwedeng split half. You divide it into two sets. First half, and then you administer the second half of the test. And then if the two are correlated, then there is internal consistency. The second and the most commonly used for scales is the Cronbach alpha. Ito yung example ko kanina sa ating instrumentation. Reliability with respect to each item. So consistent ba yung mga items that are measuring or that are attempting to measure the intangible aspects of human behavior? Dahil lang ha, mayroong power. Not working. Okay. Pasensya na, naglolo ko yung aking charger. So, Cronbach Alpha, I repeat, is used to test the reliability with respect to each item. So, if I have 10 items in the questionnaire, is there internal consistency of all the items? Are they correlated with one another in measuring the construct? Malalaman mo sa Cronbach Alpha kung aling item ang hindi tumutulong para sukatin ang construct. Meron siyang measures. So sa statistics later natin, sa klase natin si Stat, next sem, we will teach you how to do or to run a Cronbach Alpha reliability measure of a data set. Then the second one is, third one is Coder Richard or the KR, for instruments that are dichotomous in nature. The questionnaire is answerable by a yes or no, or the test has correct or incorrect test format. Then pwede nating sukatin ang internal consistency of that test using Coder Richardson. And if you want to measure inter-rater reliability, so there are 2 or more raters, and you want to determine whether they are more or less consistent in terms of how they evaluated a given performance using an instrument that you gave, then it's called inter-rater reliability. Okay. Next slide. Questionnaires. So sabi natin kanina, questionnaires are the most commonly used instrument in quantitative research, especially in education and psychological researches. So questionnaires could either be paper-based or electronic tool for collecting information. Because basically it's a list of questions or indicators that typically uses a scale, like a Likert scale. So yung Likert scale, yung common nito, yung agree-disagree scale. No? Kung hindi siya agree-disagree, don't call it a Likert scale, just a rating scale. Because the Likert scale is a particular instrument that makes use of agreement or disagreement to an item. So there are lists of questions or indicators or sentences or items, then Likert scale or other rating scale could be used. So kung hindi Likert scale, pwedeng frequency like often, ganun, always, sometimes. Pwede na namang true of me, not true of me, etc. etc. But the most commonly used scale is the Likert. Kasi mas madaling intindihin ng bata yung Likert kasi it's either mag-agree ka strongly or mag-disagree ka strongly. So questionnaires could either be structured, unstructured, or semi-structured. So pag structured, close-ended. In other words, mayroon kang tanong, limit yung responses to a scale of 1 to 5, or a yes or no, or 1, 2, 3. Unstructured, you allow the participant to respond to open-ended questions. Merong mga verbal responses na kailangan nila isulat. Semi is a combination of closed and open-ended questions. But of course, The use of questionnaires, whether structured, unstructured, or semi-structured, depends on what variables are you trying to measure. And again, these variables are based on the research questions that you have forwarded and the test that you are going to, or the hypothesis that you're going to test. Okay. Now, one of the most commonly misused or used interchangeably are the words questionnaire and survey. So when you say survey, this is the process of collecting, recording, analyzing data. So strategy of inquiry to. Survey is a strategy inquiry of a quantitative research. So it involves the whole process of collecting, recording, and analyzing the data. While questionnaire is the instrument of data collection that contains a list of ready-made questions, either closed or open-ended. So don't use questionnaire if you're talking about the survey, or don't say survey if you're pertaining to a questionnaire. Narinig nyo na yung may gumamit ng survey questionnaire, di ba? Pinagsama. Bibigay pa ako ng survey questionnaire. So it's not correct, no? Kasi yung survey nga is yung proseso. Yung questionnaire yung instrument mo. So questionnaire ang gagamitin mo sa yung survey. So there is no such thing as survey questionnaire, correlation questionnaire, experimental questionnaire, ex post facto questionnaire. There's no such thing. So it's either you say questionnaire lang for your study. So don't say questionnaire if you are referring to interview naman, because interview is different from questionnaire. Hindi ibig sabihin din ng questionnaire ay tanong or interrogative format. Although sabi natin ay open-ended questions, this may not be questions at all. Pwedeng sentences kasi agree-disagree yung format. Generic yung pagkakasagamit ng salitang ready-made questions, but they do not necessarily mean that they have to be in interrogative form. Okay? I have 3 slides left, and these are just guidelines, general guidelines in using questionnaire. So for researchers like you, beginners or non-beginners or expert, you always draft the questionnaire to begin with. So the parts include the following: personal information or section, but do not ask too much information that you are not going to need, especially now that we are guided by anti-privacy restrictions. So wag kang magtatanong ng information na hindi mo naman gagamitin doon sa yung study. Do not ask monthly income if it is irrelevant. Do not ask religion if you are not going to use it. Just for the sake of getting it, it's not worthwhile. So it starts with personal information section, the main section, which includes your open, your closed-ended questions. And then the third part is a list of open-ended questions. Always align the indicators or questions with your specific research questions. Siyempre, ang focus pa rin naman natin, di ba? The questions that we set forward in writing our indicators. Provide clear directions for answering the questionnaire. Do not just say, naiintindihan na nila yan, bibilugan nila yan. So kung walang nakalagay na bibilugan, they will not do such. So provide a paragraph or a short or a brief directions, no matter how simple it may seem to you as a researcher, but do not assume that everybody understands it, even without directions. So you have to provide clear directions for answering the questionnaire. But of course, do not make overly lengthy questionnaires because there's such thing as test fatigue. Pag masyadong mahaba yung questionnaire mo, nakita nila, gi-distribute ka 5 pages back to back. Hindi pa man nag-umpisa, pagod na sila. Ang gagawin nila, huhula-hulaan na lang yung sagot. Lalong-lalo na kung dumating ka doon na hindi ka nag-abiso, biglang may ginagawa sila, they are busy doing or preparing for an exam, but you ask them to write or to answer your questionnaire. So it's very lengthy and they are busy reviewing for a test, then they might not take answering your questionnaire seriously. Make sure that the predetermined responses match the nature of the questions. Ano ang gagamitin ko daw na predetermined responses? Depende kung ano yung sinusukat. If it is about belief, I believe, I think, mga ganon. So you ask them to respond using the strongly agree, strongly disagree format. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yung iba naman, instead na 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 at saka 5 lang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ang mayroon lang meaning yung 1, strongly agree, at yung 5 ay strongly disagree. So skill development is another issue here. Pero everything that about belief, dapat ito ang choices. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. If it is about occurrence of behavior, then you use measures of occurrence such as never, seldom, sometimes, frequently, always. If it is about quality of something, then you use qualitative responses such as poor, fair, good, very good, excellent. If it is how the behavior is manifested, these are the advised determined responses like none at all, small extent, moderate extent, great extent, very great extent. Although pare-parehas naman yan na 1 to 5, it's awkward to use poor, fair, good, very good, excellent if you are talking about belief. Halimbawa, nakalagay. Number 1, I think I am enjoying my math class. Alam naman, poor ang ilagay niya. Kung hindi siya sumasang-ayon. Anong pinupur niya doon, di ba? Poor siya doon sa belief na yon. So, hindi na siya consistent. O kaya ay, I brush my teeth. Hindi naman pwedeng strongly agree ang sasabihin niya doon. Kasi occurrence yon. So, sabat ay pwedeng always, pwedeng sometimes. So, the kind of predetermined responses should match the nature of the questions. So, belief, occurrence, quality, and manifestation of behavior are different. So, you have to match the way they will respond to it para hindi awkward yung pagsagot. Okay? Avoid highly technical terms. If there are technical terms that cannot be avoided, define them as brief as possible. Avoid using negative statements. Pag sinabing negative statements, the use of the word not. Sometimes, no, hindi nila ito napansin, o kaya yung double negatives becomes positive. So instead of saying, I'm not uninterested in math, so baka ang intindi nila doon ay uninterested lang, not pa, not uninterested, o di interested na rin yun. So do not measure vocabulary skill in the instrument part because after all, it's not an English class. It's measuring something tangible. Huwag mo nang pahirapan yung statement. Avoid leading and biased questions. So pag sinabing leading, parang gusto mo nang sabihin na ito ang sagot niya, or biased questions, may pinapaboran na response. Ito, madalas itong nakukumit, yung avoid double-barreled questions. There are 2 questions answered at a time. Nakalagay halimbawa ay, I like doing my math class and attending my science class regularly. Maaaring agree siya sa naunang part, pero disagree siya sa pangalawa. So, hindi na malinaw o ano ang kanyang isasagot. Because there are 2 questions being answered at a time, so magkaiba yung perception niya sa naunang part at dun sa pangalawang part. So avoid that. Avoid overly sensitive questions that might hurt the feeling of the respondents while answering. Use a reader-friendly layout. So ito naman ay ano na to, medyo trivial lang masyado pero alam mo naman kung malabo ba yung format, maliit ba masyado yung mga letra, dikit-dikit. Hindi ba nakaka-eyesore o hindi ba nakakainis na magsagot ng questionnaire mo just because of the layout. So the layout of the questionnaire also contributes to whether the respondents will seriously take it or not. So use a reader-friendly layout. The last few items, of course, after your draft, your revisions are made, you pilot test the questionnaire. So when you say pilot testing, you administer it to a group of respondents sharing the same characteristics as your actual respondents, pero hindi na sila yung mga actual na respondents mo. So from a different school, from a different locality or division, pero kung senior high school din, for example, math class din, STEM strand din, etc. etc. Pero hindi na sila yung totoong respondents. So we call that pilot testing. And of course, through the pilot testing, you will encounter the necessary revisions of that. And before you go to the locale of your study, make sure that you have contacted the participants before distributing questionnaires. Do not encroach their vacant times. Like they are busy eating their breaks or lunch times nila, tapos pupunta ka doon sisingit. So research studies using questionnaires are well coordinated. So in advance, you ask the permission of the school principal, you ask the permission of the class advisor or the teacher in charge. So ito ay naka-schedule kasi you might go there na merong activity and then maipilit mo lang na matapos yung data gathering mo, nanonood sila ng intramurals, nag-cheer sila ng intramurals, tapos ikaw naman sumisingit na papasagot ng questionnaire mo. So that's not idea. So test taking conditions are not conducive during those times. They are not supposed to be answering questions there. So don't distribute your questionnaires there. So coordination there. And ito ay crucial. Always attach a cover letter containing the purpose, instructions, and guarantee of confidentiality for your proposed study. And it should be signed, noted by your advisor or by authorities from the school such that they are allowing you. There is recommendation from these personalities or authorities that you are being allowed to conduct such study because there is a cover letter. Then laging hindi kalilimutan o wag kalilimutan yung guarantee of confidentiality that you are assuring or giving assurance to your respondents that all data that will be gathered in this questionnaire are for research and academic purposes only, and it shall be held with utmost confidentiality. Mga wordings na gano'n. May mga template naman tayo para doon. Okay? So at this point, I cannot show you actual instrument for a particular study kasi iba-iba naman yung studies na meron tayo. So later, yun ang ibibigay ko sa inyong assignment kung ano yung naiisip nyo na questionnaire doon sa inyong napiling mga variables after you were able to forward your research questions and hypothesis. Then I will also ask you as your assignment to come up with a sampling plan if you are going to determine it, yung iyong magiging response. Do you have any question at the moment?
None po.
Can I stop my screen now? Share. Okay, so can I ask everyone to turn on their cameras so that we can have a picture taking? So, ang susunod na meeting na natin, data analysis, ano? Pero hindi tayo mag-stat, ano? Ang gagawin natin next meeting is, given these sets of research questions, ano yung appropriate na statistics na gagamitin. Kasi kasama sa proposal yon, dapat malinaw ka agad. Hindi mo pa niraran yung data mo, dapat alam mo na, at convince na yung panel na ito yung gagamitin mong statistical analysis. Okay? So, I'll take a picture. Teresa, sino yung pwedeng kumuha din ng isa pang print screen? Okay, on my cue. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, tingnan natin kung nandun. Asan na yung ating GC? Ayan. Okay, so meron ba tayong tanong? So far? So far, so good ba tayo? Hindi naman
Yes,
kasi natin
sir.
pwedeng, as you can see, hindi naman natin pwedeng gawing format at sequence ng lesson natin yung outline parts, ano? Pero magtatagpo-tagpo sila later in a single paper. Okay? Pag titignan mo kasi yung format, nasa fourth part yung yung literature review, pero naaral natin ng nauna. So lahat ng components na yun, mabubuo na natin siya after matapos natin yung data analysis. Ang ganda ngayon naman sa bagong format, maikli na lang siya. Maikli na lang. 10 to 15 pages tapos na yung proposal. Mas maikli pa later yung yung final paper kasi publishable article na lang yung i-require. So kung yung publishable article mo, study 1 ay 10 pages, o yung pangalawa 10 pages din, hindi na katulad dati ng pakapalan ng review of unrelated literature. So dati kasi kailangan ma-convince mo yung yung thesis panel mo na pinagbuti mo kasi ang kapal kaagad ng proposal mo, hindi ba? Ngayon hindi pwedeng pakapalan ng proposal. Paliwanagan lang. Palinawan at paklaruhan ng proposal. Okay, so wala po tayong katanungan? Wala? So kung wala naman, then let's have the rest of the afternoon